physical activity. Please, Brian.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good. Hopefully, music woke you up, which is the point. Nanette usually suggested I just let the video play for 45 minutes and then we'll finish the keynote. But I think I'll have some more things to say. Great. So, first slide. Excellent. So I'm Charlie Foster. I come from a place in England called Oxford. I have the most English accent here. And my task this morning is to say very simply, a picture speaks 1,000 words. And I think as academics and as researchers and as practitioners, we should try and think more about using pictures in our work to understand how we can promote physical activity rather than speaking about it. Okay. This is my declaration of interests. If you're a verbal person, you can read it, but if you're a visual person, you can look at the pictures, because actually they make more sense. So my funding is along the top line here, from all these different institutions. These are the people I don't take money from. I don't take money from food, I don't take money from sweet drinks, and I don't take money from drug companies. And these are my personal interests here. I have 2 bicycles, 6 paddleboards, and a dog. Oh yes, and we're also members of these organisations on here, very important. HEPA Europe is put up, and is put there as well. This is where I come from. It's very beautiful, it's very foggy, and very wet. This is my view from my office in the top left-hand corner. This is a local thing that we're talking about environmental correlates. We have some interesting architecture in Oxford, including fish that land in rooms. This is how I get to work. This is my commute. When I hunt, I go hunting every morning. These are my students saying what a great lecture they've just attended. This actually is the reality. That is my office here in the corner of the building site, and that's my view from my window. A picture does speak 1,000 words. Okay, well, this is our group. This is what we do. We look at the evidence base for how to promote physical activity and also nutrition. We're looking particularly at policy-related issues, environment, and changing and measuring physical activity. And across this theme, we've started to use images much more. And so this morning, I want to take you on a little journey to understand how we can all use images more effectively. And here again is a nice picture to show exactly what we're about. We have a heart as our central part of our funding because the British Heart Foundation are our sponsors and our research providers mainly. Okay. So I want to look at some of the applications and how they work, reflect on their adoption, and also on suggestions on how we use the new images. Now, pictures have been around for a very, very long time. It's an image of hunting. And actually, an essential part of being a human being is the creative process. And I think as scientists, we often try and stifle our creativity. And I'm very into creativity. I like to employ people who are creative and innovative, because I think it helps us improve what we do and challenges our thinking. We've got examples through here, and also we've got a local example here as well from Turkish wrestling. I hope we don't have any of this after the conference dinner tonight, because it looks pretty full on. A picture tells 1,000 words, so this is the thesis that we're trying to expand today. And here's a good example. So here's the border between 2 European countries. Can you see the different policy reflections on how they promote active transport? One is clearly supporting bicycling, and the other is not, and clearly supporting walking. Okay, any guesses of the countries? Belgium and Netherlands. Yeah, well done. Good. Okay. Street view is a very helpful thing. This is an environmental correlate. I would love one day to run a randomised critter or bear trial, an RBT. I think it would be fantastic. It definitely would improve people's intensity of their physical activity, which I know would be good news with our physiologists amongst us. Let's look at their applications of images and correlates and intervention research. I have sort of intellectual map of how we present our science, and this is my wardrobe. This is how I store studies in my head. And I'm going to concentrate on correlates, mediators, interpersonal factors, and interventions in the middle. And because I know there's lots of very important psychologists in the room, I thought I should try and put some token kind of theory to this, and this is a social ecological model which we've adapted. What we're trying to do is look at the different types of variables, probably these ones here are the sort of more environmental end and how they might impact on behaviour. We need to understand what they are if we're going to change policy. So there has to be a story that runs through this, that connects these two areas. So I'd like to talk about 4 studies that we do: the Street View study, Journey to School, a Tiny study, and the Stoke Map study. And these are helping us understand, particularly from an environmental perspective, what's going on. Okay, so here's a great classic picture. The images you saw beforehand were taken from little wearable cameras that we've been using for a few years. Originally developed by Microsoft, and now they're available through various organisations. And there's been a number of these little wearable image takers around. They're very useful, and they get under the skin of what people are doing. And when you ask people to talk to their images, they get very animated, and you can find out much more than if you just ask them about the behaviour. So we've got 2 images here, typically Oxford, and a nice wet day when it's been raining. But that street here is one of the main streets where all the students go out to party and drink and eat things. It's called Cowley Road, and actually in terms of street furniture and the design, it's actually quite pedestrian and cycling friendly if you're on it at 6 a.m. in the morning. Because by the time it goes later, it's full. Not quite as full as Istanbul Street, but pretty full for an English street here. And the experience of using it is very important. So that one of the weaknesses of using images to understand how the environment is presented is this temporal issue, because it's a cross-sectional picture at that particular point in time, and things clearly change. Here again, a street view picture of Magdalen Bridge, one of the classic parts of Oxford. It doesn't normally look this sunny, it usually looks like this. And these puddles here, this is where the water collects, actually spill out onto the street. So you have to move out the cycle lane and go and join the buses and the taxis. So again, the environmental conditions can make quite a big difference in terms of pictures. So pictures can also be deceiving. So we decided to use Street View as a way of auditing the quality of streets in terms of relation to walking and cycling. We conducted a study up in Wigan, which is the north of the country, and we looked at over 130 miles of street by street view. I sat in my office, I audited the street segments, 150 metres through it. And we used this particular way just to get under the skin of what's going on. And was Street View very good? And then, of course, we had to go and walk the streets to see whether they were really like that. What we discovered was that Street View is not terribly up to date, things can change very rapidly, and roads that look very lovely can be very different in the reality. Street View offers a way forward. So if you're going to use Street View as a way of understanding the environment, you have to do some ground truthing. I think it's very important. We also been working with some children on their journey to school. And you can see them here wearing an earlier version of the cameras as they did their journey to and from school, so we could understand what sort of things children get up to on their journeys to school and from school as well. And what we found was lots of different images of different kinds of foods, lots of ways they got to school as well, and we discovered this. And when we talked to the children, we became very animated. We could understand their decision making. In fact, we found one picture of an apple in the 7 days across the 20 children we worked with. We were quite pleased about that. It was one example of healthy eating. Most of the time, it was pretty junk food all the way. But what we did notice was the importance. One, children spend a lot of time on their mobile phone. We've got thousands of pictures of them playing on their phones in front of us. And the second thing we found is the kids really made some decision making about their travel to school, not based on any rational reasons. They travelled to school because their friends were walking that way. They refused to walk up a hill to a shop because it was just too much effort. They couldn't be bothered. And a lot of things that we perhaps take for granted as researchers in terms of proximity and access actually didn't stack up. We wouldn't know that unless we talked with the children and we had challenged our assumptions about what was going on. So some of you may have used GPS, which is another instrument we're quite familiar with in Oxford. And this is an example of a snail trail, the journey that someone might classically take. And it's very helpful, particularly when you're understanding why people are going to particular environments. And let's say you had accelerometry data with this, but you need to understand what's going on. So we have here the images on those particular journeys. And again, it looks about route choice. For this particular cyclist, it was about avoiding cars. Didn't want to go down Cowley Road, which is here. to go to town, which would have been the easiest way, and a rather rambling route, this one. But he wanted to avoid cars, so off-road routes are really important. So again, the images will help us understand what's going on in people's decision making, and it's usually quite different to the literature that we find. Again, another example is the typical walking choices and patterns, people using connections through shopping centres and things like that, where again GPS might fail, and obviously people doing journeys for particular purposes and trip changing. So we've got issues of buying food and veg, using their credit card, that's quite useful, that funded the rest of the study. And also here in terms of taking public transport as well. So, who here has used an accelerometer? Could you stand up? Stand up if you've ever used an accelerometer. Yeah, good. Who's wearing one right now? Put your hand up if you've got one on. One of those Fitbit-y kind of things. Yeah, Bill, of course, he's got one. Yeah, thank you very much. Sit down, good. Draw away again. Excellent. So, you can all tell from your accelerometry what's going on, can't you? Alright, well, your clever devices are guessing through algorithms what particular physical activity you're doing. And we found this particularly challenging because we were asked to try and do some validation studies of accelerometers and also self-report instruments. We really struggled for what's the gold standard, how would we find out? So we've got people to wear cameras. So a little test here. Turn to the person next to you. What we have here on this x-axis and y-axis here is activity count, it's magnitude. So the higher the spike, the more intense the activity. Along the bottom is time. Okay? And this period up to here is night time, and that's daytime. And I want you to turn to your neighbour, you might have to stretch there, Francesca, and identify which was the spike along here where the baby woke up. Turn to your neighbour and try and guess which one it is. Alright? So I'm going to get you to stand up in a minute, it's a quiz. I'm going to get you to stand up. Turn to your neighbour and guess which one is the baby waking up the person wearing the accelerometer. You've got 10 seconds, go. I'd like you to wave at me if you think that over the far right is the baby waking up. No. It's this one, isn't it? This little cute one over here. Excellent. So what we can do is we can explain the accelerometry through the images about what's going on. And I think this is incredibly helpful. Someone who finds accelerometry assessment a bit of a dark art. Remember, there are 24 steps between you taking off your accelerometer and you getting activity counts at the end. There are 24 assumptions you have to take. So do not tell me this is an objective measure when it comes to the processing. It's not. So we need to understand what these spikes and what's going on here. And in fact, this is one of the genius posters one of my research staff made at the ISPA conference, and she used it as a quiz. We got people to guess what was going on in these particular images. We can see here we've got examples of sports. In fact, this is cricket practice. It's kind of a sport. We've got eating pizzas. We've got cycling to work. Interesting, the cycle is much less intense than the sports going on. We've got playing with the baby here, quite a long period of time. I think it's fairly early, it's at 5 a.m., so obviously very well received. TV watching in bed. So by triangulating with images through self-report diaries along here in the time use study and also the accelerometry, we can really get under the skin of what's going on. And I think as behaviourists, that's incredibly helpful. So what I'd like to point out to you, if you could imagine you used images with someone to change their behaviour, what you might find is they're getting incredibly animated. And we might get past this misclassification error that we had Utafix explain to us yesterday. Because people will tell you what they think they do, not what they actually do. And when we play people's images back to them, there is a very large moment of dissonance between what they think they do and what they actually do. And that's very helpful when it comes to changing behavior. Okay, So what we have here is another example of how we can explain here. We've got a classic heat map from the Baker RDI Institute. And what we've managed to do again is synchronize the images with accelerometry. You can tell I didn't make the slides, made by computer scientists, so I'm just standing let it happen. I think that's there. So how is this helpful? Perhaps potentially we can use it across the day to chunk up what types of activity you are by classifying both the counts and the images. And we can start feeding this information back. And typically this is what your accelerometer does on your wrist if you use one of the expected devices through algorithms. This is much more accurate because we actually know what people are up to and they tell us, identify it. So again, I think it's again incredibly helpful. But there's some issues. I mean, it's not perfect. In terms of the metrics of what it can tell us, where you are, who you're with, what you're doing, why and when, images and street view and sense cam images only give us some of the answers, so you do need multiple devices. And again, for physical activity, Doherty in my group is very clear that he feels he can identify type, frequency, and time by just the images alone. I think that's an interesting claim. And again, with food purchasing, you've got types and frequency. So again, it's quite helpful. So we did a study in Stoke. Stoke is a classic northern industrial town set across 7 valleys in the north of England. Very population that doesn't traditionally move very much. And what we did is we asked people to draw what their neighbourhoods were. And the reason for this is I was getting quite frustrated with researchers defining what they thought people's neighbourhoods were just by administrative areas or distance. All right? Because my neighbourhood could be very different to yours. So we asked people to draw their neighbourhoods on maps. Guess what? One, they weren't very good at it. But they also had incredibly different views about what their neighbourhood was. So when we're asking people, what are your perceptions within a 1 mile radius or a 2 kilometre buffer around your home, you decide what their neighbourhood is, not them, and that's not congruent. And what we have here is this massive difference in range of different types of neighbourhoods that people do. Some of them are incredibly small. Some of them are bounded, of course, by important infrastructure like roads. Frequently we found where there were major roads going through people's neighbourhoods, that was the boundary. So this sort of separation that roads can construct is really important. And also we asked them to identify within the neighbourhoods important places that they would walk to or travel to. A lot of them didn't walk actually, it's on the car and drove 100 yards up the road. But again, we've got retail, space and family. So this destination's mixture of land use, etc. is very important. So it gives us, again, another insight to why people are choosing their areas. And again, using maps can be quite helpful with that. I'd like to see more people adopt it. Okay. Well, we have real technology. We can't fight it. I don't know if this is your dinner table, but it's certainly ours. We have a bang on mobile phone. We all have lots of these. You need wonderful devices, and they're very helpful. But they do have their drawbacks. Most of them are based on systems. So they have to measure, they have to assess through algorithms and give you feedback. So you have a sensor, a system that identifies what's going on, and a platform that will feed the information back to you. How can this be done perhaps more effectively than just numbers? So I'm looking particularly, there's a system here from a Queensland study in terms of walking promotion. Give an example. Someone carries their iPhone, the internet picks up their data to a central server, gets processed, they can access a web browser to get feedback, and they can also keep wearing their phone while they're walking. All right. The main issue with this particular study was they had 91 people in the intervention group and 90 in the control. Any guesses on how many people they had to approach to get 91 or 180 adopters of this particular technology? 6,500. So there's an issue of reach in technology. All right. I think you'll probably find the younger you are, the younger people are, they'll be more willing to adopt this. But again, I think there's some challenges in terms of getting people to pick up on the use of this information as well. Intervention research. One of the key principles when I was working clinically was to feed back people's behaviour against their current recommendation. So we had to assess their behaviour, and they told us what it was. And I would love to have the opportunity to have a real images plane. And we're trying to work now with clinicians in Oxford with heart failure patients on how we can actually play back their weeks to them. Because what we find with accelerometry traces of heart failure patients is they do all their activity in the morning and the rest of the day they stay very still because it's done. They don't need to move around anymore. And I think it's a real challenge to try and get them to see what goes on. So let's look at practice. Some principles of behaviour change. We're good at changing physical activity behaviour. We're just not very good at getting other people to do it on our behalf. We can't implement our science, and this is a real challenge for us. We know from Susan Mickey's work that these are the 5 kind of best buys in terms of strategies to deploy to change behaviour. And of course, your very clever bands are doing this right now. This is one from Fitbit here, and this is from the website. It does lots of things. It tells you how great it is. But all it's doing is all these issues here. It's monitoring your behaviour, it's giving you feedback, it's prompting attention for me, it's kind of maintain your ability to change. It wants you to set goals, and it wants you to review them. That's what it does. These are the effective interventions. So the answer is here, folks, the commercial industry have beaten us to it. They are fantastic at this stuff. So let's not start reinventing mechanisms to do this. These guys have got it. And in fact, now Fitbit will realise this, and they now have a research platform. You can get anyone's Fitbit data sent straight to your PC and you can start analysing it. All right, so it's not an ad for Fitbit, I just think it's very sensible when we're trying to use these as a ways of monitoring and also changing and supporting behaviour change. It's done. Things need to be easy and simple. It's like with Simon Marshall. If you're driving on the road and the speed sign says you're going too quickly, you slow down, hopefully. It's instant, it's there, and that's again what these systems are very good at doing. This is a trial that we've got going starting in the new year at the workplace, where we're looking at pedometer-based devices, nutrition, and trying to make the information feedback, and it's not as visual as it should be. Using these dashboards with indicators on how people are performing, and trying to give the information in a way that's as visual as possible rather than numeric. So we're finding, particularly with piloting, that some groups just didn't understand the numbers, and actually making the images work for you will be much more helpful. We're also interested in looking at sleep behaviour, a hugely important area, and I think quite underestimated in relation to physical activity. So new scientists amongst us get into sleep and physical activity. Pretty good. Again, this is how it works. Again, trying to use much more visual ways of feeding information back in. It's still step counts, it's still the same basic stuff, but it's how do we present it back to people in the way it's the same. Okay. All right. So let's look at new research suggestions. Generally, you know what you're doing, you don't know what I'm doing here. Who here has a mobile phone? Everybody, I suspect. Right now, your mobile phone is sending a signal to a base station outside saying where you are. That information is taken by your mobile phone supplier and sold to people who want to know what kinds of people like you are doing. And it's called digital breadcrumbs. You leave a digital set of breadcrumbs like Hansel and Gretel through the woods. Everywhere you go, your phone leaves a trail. This information is very useful if you want to plan, and here's an example, I think it's San Francisco, where you want to plan to put your new bar to attract 40-year-olds to go along and drink, because you need to know where they actually go in the area. And this data sort of skimming here is happening right now in the US. It's trying to move it across the UK now as well. In fact, I believe in Norway they're going to do a whole week where everyone's data from their mobile phones will be available. And I think it sounds incredibly exciting to work out where people spend their time. So don't think for a moment this idea of mapping can be used, technology can be used to understand what's going on. If you want to know more about it, look up Eagle, Eagle, who works at Harvard. It's great, actually MIT. Again, this has also been adopted by networks of scientists on the European platform called the Living Labs. So again, look at these. These are geographers and advertisers who are interested in where humans go and what they do. We're also interested in that and how they move. So we have to step outside our kind of working areas and work with others. Can we use images to nudge behaviour? I really like this one. You've got, looks like these cartoon characters are crossing the road when you drive towards them. In fact, they're just drawn that way, help you slow down. It's really good. We've got ideas at the end of using recycling, using bins, so people will pick up and follow footsteps. They're just usual traditional ways, used very creatively in practice. Now, I like this. This is nice. So this is a council in London called Lambeth Council, not in a very rich or affluent area of London. And they're trying to get the community to engage in projects on how they can spend the council's money. And the councils in England have very little money at the moment, so it needs to be spent wisely. I don't know here if anyone's heard of a game called The Sims. Yeah? Where you create I remind kids, but I have no idea what they do. It's cost a lot of money. And you create things. You drag these playground ideas into your park. You build your park. And as you drag in an Astro pitch for £150,000 into the park, your budget goes down, and your maintenance budget goes down as well. What they're asking is they're asking everyone in Lambeth to build their own park, see what the general feel for a park would be. What they're finding is the children are much better at designing parks than adults. Kids know exactly what they want, like skate parks and flowers and beaches. And here's my rather sad attempt to do this. Why I like this, and sorry it's not animated, this actual image when you're on the website is animated. So you get people playing football between the goalposts here. I make some goalpost trees, I thought it was quite innovative. You spend money on mowing the grass to keep it short so people can play things, like spontaneous games. It's a very nice design, and it's starting to take the principles of environmental design and put them into the public domain and the good implementation side. And I'm very happy to talk more about it. So go on the website, design your park at Lambeth. It's a very good idea. It could be a really good way of engaging the community and how we implement successful science and practice. So there's some pros and cons of maps and images. I think the pros generally outweigh the cons. It does take more time. It does require you to speak with people and explain what goes on, because sometimes what you think the images do isn't necessarily what's happening there as well. But we're now finally, the thing for us in the UK at the moment is how do we translate the HEPA recommendations into ways that health professionals will understand. Our HEPA recommendations came out in 2011, a number of people in the room were involved in constructing them. And at the time we said it's great to make these epidemiological precise recommendations, but what do we tell the public and what do we tell health professionals to do in a way that they will understand? Our last survey of health professionals' knowledge on the HEPA recommendations estimated it's about 7% of our total population of health professionals, 1.5 million, knew the HEPA recommendations. So we have a challenge here. So our Chief Medical Officer set up a group to try and redesign an infographic that would present this information to health professionals in a way they can understand. And infographics have been around, and I like the way they tell a story using images. Another nice one here from WHO Europe, just about different types of HEPA. I thought it was very visual, very good. And this is the one we've done for the CMO guidelines. And again here, we're trying to story. So health professionals told us they wanted the benefits of physical activity, some of the relative risks. Kind of not so happy with that, but that's what they said they wanted. And these sort of four key pillars, being active, sitting less, build strength, improve your balance, particularly for older adults, so we're talking about 18 to 80 plus. Again, balance is very important. You can't see these, but these are representations of different types of activities. We argued for hours about which one should be in there, but they told us in the end. It's still a bit complex, it's still quite wordy, but it's starting to translate these things into something that's useful. Okay, so it adds depth to our information. Images and maps can give us a much better understanding of the correlates and determinants of physical activity, so we can make smart interventions and then we can implement them into practice. Because it's no good our science stopping in journals. We have to change the way the world operates. We have to simplify, it simplifies some complex information. It gives difficult concepts a way of being presented in a simple, synthetic way. And it gives you feedback. And I think in clinical practice, particularly for high disease groups, I think the idea of understanding their behaviour in situ is very important. And certainly, for heart failure patients, that's what we're going to go to next. They will be shown as a clinical tool what their week looks like. And I think it's more equitable. Remember, the reading age of the population is much lower than the reading age in this group. We have to walk in other people's shoes if we really want to promote that. Okay, that's what I hope that I've talked about. And I stand in the back of an incredibly fantastic team. They're wonderful, not so some are here today, and I hope you just take away that the picture does speak 1,000 words, so let's use more. Thank you for listening.